Tonight we're going to add another piece to the puzzle. And what we're answering is how to connect with God. Because what we're ultimately trying to do is get God to bless our lives. Anybody not want that? I mean, everybody wants that. So the question is, how do we make this connection? And last week we talked about the Passover because it was a great picture of Jesus 1,400 years before it ever happened. And the details included in that story, I mean, that's just the way it works. So tonight we're going to talk about David's heart. Because, let me just read this introduction. It says, this lesson shows the sincere heart of David. It lets us look into the depths of his thoughts and consequently helps us to understand why God used him. The pattern given by David instructs us as to how to successfully approach God. Now, just hold that idea in your head a second, how to successfully approach God. I mean, that's why we have so much religion, because people are trying to figure that out. How can I successfully approach God? And I just don't think that religion does us any favors. I think it's our enemy. I think it's a barrier between us and God. It does not connect us with God. So I think the question on the heart of everybody in the world is how to successfully approach God. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to see that in the life of David. So let me just give you a little history here and tell you how we got to David. In the Old Testament, Genesis, we have the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Abraham had a son Isaac. Isaac had a son Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And from then on, we're talking to and about Israel. When you talk about the people of Israel, you're talking about Jacob's descendants. After Jacob, we had Joseph. Joseph took the people down into Egypt. And they stayed down there 430 years, or 480, or one of those. And then Moses delivered them out of Egypt. And now when they went to Egypt, by the way, there were 70 people. When they came out of Egypt 430 years later, there were 600,000 men, not including women and children. So they multiplied. And God had already told them that I'm going to multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, as the sand of the sea. I mean, you can't even count them all. So now, out in the wilderness, they're wandering back. They're trying to get back to the promised land, which is the land of Israel today. They were in Egypt, and they went back to the land of Israel. And so now when they got into Israel, they were operating by what we would call a theocracy. That means rule by God. So it was God, and He was sort of mediating with a priest or a prophet or whoever they had that was sort of the mouthpiece of God. And during this particular time, there was a prophet named Samuel. And so Samuel, he's doing his thing, and being the intermediary between God and the people. And one day, the people decided, you know what, we want a king. Now, the thing that started it was Samuel had 2 sons, and they weren't good kids. And they were so afraid that when Samuel passed off the scene, that one of these kids would take over for Samuel. Well, that wasn't the way it worked. God appoints the priest, not the people. And this is not an election, right? So they said, we want us a king. And all the nations around us have kings. Why can't we have a king? And when I say all the nations, it's no big deal. Over there, if you got one person that's a king, you got 6 subjects, you got a kingdom. And one of the biggest cities, the oldest city on the planet was Jericho. And guess how big it was? Jericho. 6 acres. That's it, the whole city. So don't get impressed by kingdoms. Except now we've got these people, and they were in the promised land, and they said, we want a king. So Samuel went to God and said, they want a king. And I'm going to read now from 1 Samuel chapter 8. And it said, and the Lord said to Samuel, I'm going to look at verse 7 here. He said, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should rule over them. He said, you know what, don't take this personal, Samuel. It's me they're rejecting. God said, it's me they're rejecting. It's not you they're rejecting. And it says, according to the works that they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, they have forsaken me. And they've served other gods, and that's what they're doing unto you also. I mean, they're just making a mockery of this whole experience. And so God says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give them a king. Now, this brings up something very interesting, because God then helped them select a king. Now, the thing that's interesting about this was not the perfect will of God, but it turned out to be the permissive will of God. So God permitted them to go bad. Isn't that interesting? And why is that? Because you don't learn anything until you're having hard knocks in your life or some kind of a struggle. You don't learn anything. If we're all on the mountaintop all the time, where's the learning experience? We don't have one until we get into the valley. And down in the valley now, that's where we start learning. And so you got to have this, why does God allow evil? Because God designed life to where you'd need Him. And if you don't need Him, who's interested in God? So He permitted these people to make this mistake. And the mistake was that they were going to select a king. And yet, here's what happened. He said, you go back and reason with the people, and you tell them now, if they've got a king, kings have armies, and where are they going to get these armies? Well, He's going to choose your sons. Your sons are going to be well, okay, then don't they have to have horses? He's going to take your horses. Well, you got to feed them, don't you? Yeah, He's going to take your food. Who's going to cook the food? Your daughters. He's creating a government here. Big government. And He says, He's going to tax the daylights out of you. You're not going to like this. So Samuel went back to the people and he said, this is what's going to happen. They said, we want a king. Don't want to hear it. Give us a king. We'll take the taxes. We can handle it. And so that's exactly what happened. And He taxed the daylights out of them. Now, during this time, there was a guy that was named Saul. And Saul was actually chosen by God to be the king. And Saul came along and said, you know what, I don't know anything about being a king. I didn't take that in high school, So, but he was the guy voted most likely to succeed. He's the tallest guy, the captain of the football team, and this guy was a charismatic kind of fellow, and everybody loved Saul. So God said, all right, we're going to choose Saul and see how this works. And Saul said, man, I don't know nothing about this. And so the prophet Samuel said to them, he said in chapter 10 and I'm in 1 Samuel 10:6, he said, the Spirit of God will come upon you, and you shall prophesy with the prophets, and you shall be turned into another man. He said, something's going to happen. God's going to get hold of your heart, turned into another man. And I'm saying when God gets hold of your heart, you turn into another man. You turn into something different. You're not like you were. And by the way, last night I went to the prison, and I told that to 75 prisoners. I mean, they screwed up. That's why they're there. They need to own up and say, look, it's me. I got to get fixed. My priorities are all messed up. Well, they're all messed up. The only difference between prison and us and them is they got caught. And we probably didn't. We probably all done enough to get put in jail. You know what I'm saying? And we're not listening to confessions tonight, so we don't worry about that. And so here's what it says. And it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, listen to this, God gave him another heart. So it looks like now that the operative word in this experience is what's going on in a person's heart. So he's really looking for the heart. And he's saying to us that this whole business with God, it's a heart matter. And that's where we connect with God from the heart. We don't connect with God based on what we do externally. I mean, you can get good at religion. You can do everything your religion says. And next week we're going to talk about a guy like that. Everything your religion says, and it doesn't make any difference. It's the heart. That's where the connection's made. So here's Saul, by the way. He's going along, doing good as a king. And, I didn't think I was... and after a while, he started feeling pretty good about this. I got this king thing. I didn't think I was going to be all right. But I'm a pretty good king when you get right down to it. I got this. And so the moment he did that, all of a sudden God said, I can't use this guy anymore. He thinks he's all that, and he's not. He stopped depending on me. He's now depending on his own expertise, and that's nothing but trouble. And so what happened was Samuel the prophet came along and said, you know what, here's what's going to happen, man. You've done the wrong thing here. And it says, and now I'm in chapter 13, verse 14, now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought after him a man after his own heart. And the Lord commanded him, and that's it. He said, man, this is it. We're coming to the end of your kingdom. So here we have the prophet going to the king. This is dangerous stuff now, talking to the king like that. And he said, you're done. God's done with you. So long before Samuel abdicated the throne, along came David. And God said, we're going to pick a guy, and we're going to find a guy. And he found a guy named David. And he was selected from a family that we call the family of Jesse. And so he went to he sent the prophet, God sent the prophet Samuel to the house of Jesse. And he said, God sent me here. You've got a son that we're going to make king. And Jesse said, whoa, this is cool, man. My son's going to be the king? And he didn't think about Saul, how's that going to work? But he said, all right, let me get my boys in here. You can figure out which one you want. So he brought in all the best of the boys, and Samuel said, nope, that's not the one. Nah. Well, don't you have any? None of these. Don't you have another son? He said, yeah, we got one. He's out tending the sheep. He's kind of the run of the litter, And so, well, bring him in here. And there's something extremely important, and this is what you need to know. Here's what it says. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Pick up on this. For man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. All right, we got a theme developing here. It's about the heart. And so we're saying now that if you want to successfully approach God, it's got to come from the heart. And God's looking for someone whose heart can knit with His. God's looking for someone who has a heart for God. And so it's all about the heart. So David now was selected from out of his family. Now as time went on, and by the way, I'm going to read in 1 Samuel 16 and verse 14, it says, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit troubled him. So now we've got Saul, the king, and he's troubled, man. I don't know what's going on here. I was riding high, and now I'm kind of in the dumps here, and I was feeling good about things, and now not so good. And so he's got this troubled spirit. You get that sometimes. And so now we got a little conflict. David knows he's been anointed to be the king. And Saul, he knows that he's been it's taken from him, but he doesn't know that his replacement is David. So so they're going along, and after a while, something happened. And there was this guy named Goliath. Now, we all know the name Goliath, don't we? You know the name Goliath? We all know. All right, David and Goliath, we know this story. So what happened was the Philistines, one of the local kings, and they were fighting over the land. That's what people do over there. By the way, that's what people do over here. That's what they do everywhere. They fight over, and I boiled it down to two things. Listen to this. Everything in the world boils down to two issues: who's in charge and who gets the credit. That's all. And I want to be in charge of the land. And I want to be in charge of the country. I want to be in charge of the wealth. I want to be in charge of the religion. Wait a minute. I want to be in charge of the home. I want to be in charge. It's all about that, man, and who gets the credit for things. So all that does is feed our own ego, and it just gets us in trouble. That's all it does. So this guy, the Philistines, had this big champion. He was 9 foot something, crazy big. And so they sent him down. They said, look, send your champion to the valley. We'll send ours, big Igor down there. And you just send and we'll see who wins the day. We'll let your champion fight our champion, and whoever wins, they win the day. So there was a big standoff, a Mexican standoff in Israel. I don't know how that works. So they're down in the valley of this big giant Goliath. So David wasn't even big enough to come to war. This is just a run of a kid. His brothers were in the army. Guess what? They got drafted. Right? They were part of the taxation process. David's back keeping sheep. So he brought his lunch one day to the brothers, said, hey, here, I'm just bringing lunch to you, and hey, what's going on here? Well, he's got this big dude down there, and David's going, well, why don't you go down there and kick his butt? What's the matter with you guys? And he said, well, have you looked at him? This is one big guy. And David just got indignant about this. David said, man, what's the matter with you? There's a cause here. Come on, rise to the occasion. And they went, David, come on, you're going to get us in trouble now. Just keep your mouth shut. David said, I'll go. And they're going, David, you're going to get killed. Man, just go back and take care of the sheep. And he said, look, I fought a bear. I fought a lion. This is no big deal. I can do this. So Saul, the king, got wind of this and said, if this kid's bent on going down there and getting killed, we're just going to have to let him go. So he put his armor on David, and David's a runt, Saul's a giant, and the thing didn't fit. I can't even carry your sword. I don't need all this. He said, I'm pretty good with this slingshot. And by the way, I've been to Israel. These guys with a slingshot, they can knock the eye off a fly. They got it, man. He said, I can do this. I'm just going to go and handle this thing. Down into the valley he went, and he picked up some rocks, and so now he's going to deal with Goliath. And so Goliath, he said in chapter 17, verse 43, and the Philistines said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I'm going to give your flesh to the fowl of the air and the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day will God deliver you into my hand. Now, something very cool is going on here. Here's what David's doing. This is a great lesson. This is a great lesson. He's going out on a limb, and he's cutting it off behind him. He's saying, I am going to depend on God. That's it. If it doesn't work, I'm toast. If it does, then God gets the credit. But I'm going to depend on God. And I want you to know this, that in this whole experience, God loves dependency. In fact, I think that He made us, everyone, dependent. Now, we don't like us men. We don't like talking about that kind of thing. You know, we're strong like bull. You know, we want to make our own way. No, listen, you're going to screw this up, you know. It's so easy to do. And it says in Hebrews 12, I read this last night at the prison where I preached there. I said, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us. I mean, easily. We're so easily led astray. God loves dependency. So what David was doing here was demonstrating his total dependence on God. Because one false move and he's toast. So David picked up the sling, threw the rock. You know the story. It hit him in the head. Down he went. He picked up the guy's sword, cut his head off. End of story. And David says, me and God are a majority. Two of us, that's enough. We can defy anybody. So now we have this guy, and so we're going along, and Saul was very impressed by this whole experience. This kid David, man, look at the courage of this guy. So he brought him into his army. We need a guy like you, you know. You're the kind of guy we're looking for, sort of a leader here, a guy with guts. And so David said, all right, I'll go along with this. And so they would go out to battle. And when they came back from battle, it says, here's what would happen. And the women would answer one another as they played their musical instruments. And they said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul went, well, they sure like this kid David. You know, these women like this kid. And it said, and Saul was angry, and the saying displeased him. And it said, and Saul eyed David from that day forward, like this. Who is this kid? You know, I don't know if I can trust this guy. You know, it looks like he's getting awful popular. And it said, and Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. Well, that is a fearful experience. You know, God takes his hand of blessing off you, and what do you got going? Nothing. You know what I'm saying? So what we need to do, we got to do it the other way around. We got to learn to be dependent on him. Where does it come from? It's in the heart. It's totally in the heart. And every bit of the outward expression of religion does nothing if you're not in the heart. You can go to church and sit in the front row, have your Bible, the biggest Bible in the place, raise your hand higher than anybody else, put more money in the plate than anybody else, sing louder than anybody else, and if it's just all outward display, you just wasted your time. You're spitting in the wind. It's going to come back on you. Well, after a while, David ran from Saul because Saul got a little nervous about him. And as time went on, Saul finally, in despair, killed himself. He just sort of fell on his sword and said, I've had enough of this. And so he killed himself, and David became king. Now, if you're following the outline here, I'm down in point number 6. And David, it says, was the penman of Psalms. So David wrote most of the Psalms. Not all of them, but David wrote most of the Psalms. So if you want to know the way David thinks, you look at the Psalms and you say, who talks like this? Here's one. Listen to this. Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined unto me, and he heard my cry. He says, he brought me up also out of a horrible pit and out of the miry clay. He set my feet upon a rock. He established my going. He put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. And many shall see it and fear the Lord and shall trust in him. And I'm saying, who talks like that? You know? I mean, nobody talks like that. But David did. And that's because he had time to ponder. He had time to get things in his heart. And he was knit with God in the heart, you see. Now, in 2 Samuel chapter 11, something happened. And this is a sad, sad story, but I think it's important for us to know this story. It says that in chapter 11, verse 1, it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, so apparently that's the right time to go do that, it said that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all the children or of all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon, and they besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. So here's what happened. Normally, he's out front with his troops. This time he said, yeah, I'm going to take a little vacation. This is where we get the notion, idle hands are the devil's workshop. So here he is. He's not doing what he ought to do, and there's going to be some trouble come his way. And it came to pass in the evening that David arose from off his bed, and he walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. Now, I've been to the Middle East. I know how it works. They put their baths up on the roof. The castle, David's, would be higher than anybody else's. So he could stand on his roof, look down and see everybody doing whatever it is they do. And he saw this woman bathing down there, and he went, whoa, look at this, And so now we've got the old lust of the eye going on here, And David said, boy, she's pretty, man, I tell you. And I'd kind of like to have this girl, Hey, wait a minute, I'm the king. I can do anything I want to do. So he sent for this girl. Her name was Bathsheba. And being obedient, she came. And he had sex with her. And she was married. And so then he sent her home. Well, guess what? She got pregnant. And David's going, oh man, now what do I do? I got this girl pregnant, and her husband's not even anywhere around. I can't blame it on anybody. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so he concocted this great scheme. He said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and send for her husband. His name was Uriah. I'm going to send for Uriah, and I'm going to get him to come home, and he'll go visit his wife, of course, And so I'll get out of this thing. And so Uriah came, and he stood before the king, and he said, Uriah, I want you to send a note back to your captain. And I'll send you off with it in the morning. But tonight, just go on home and, enjoy your family. And Uriah said, I don't feel right about this. My fellow, they're out there and I'm here. And, man, I don't feel right about this. So he wouldn't go home. He stayed in the street all night and slept in the street. And David's going, oh, my gosh, now what do I do? And this girl's pregnant. I can't get her husband to get involved. I don't know what. So he came up with this grand scheme. And he wrote a note to Uriah's captain and said, send Uriah up to the front of the battle where it's the hottest. And then just tell the other guys to back off of him. And we're going to let him get killed. And so that's what he did. So Uriah took the note. It was sealed. Took it to his captain, and the captain did as he was ordered by the king, and Uriah died. And so now David did the only honorable thing. He married the girl, Nice time to be talking about honor, right? And so now he took her into his own house. And now he's the father of this child, and as time goes on, everything seems to be going okay, but it's never okay. You know what I'm saying? It's just never okay. There's a verse of Scripture that says, he that covers his sins shall not prosper. And I'm going to tell you this, you can do anything you want to do, but somebody's going to find it out somewhere along the line because God knows. You may look this way and that, but if you kind of cover all the bases, you can't cover God's eyes. So as time went on, I don't know how much time, maybe a couple of years. 9 months of pregnancy, the child's born, and so I think David's going, well, I haven't even thought about this for a year or so. But one day, God sent a prophet to David. And it says, and the Lord sent Nathan unto David. And he came to him, and he said unto him, listen to this story. He said, there are two men in one city. So this is the prophet talking to David. Now this is a Jewish trick. You tell a story, you get somebody to condemn themselves. He said, one of them was rich and the other was poor. And the rich man had exceeding flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb, which he had brought up and nourished, and he grew up together with it and with his children, and he did eat of his own meat and drank of his own cup, and he said, and then there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herds. He had 1,000 sheep. He said, I got to feed this traveler. I think what I'll do is steal that guy's one lamb. And so he told that story to David. And David says, as the Lord lives, that the man that has done this thing shall surely die. This is terrible. Who would do that? And it says, and he killed the man and took his lamb. And David said, we got to deal with this. And Nathan looked him in the eye and said, you're the man. David said, oh man, he's right. I am the man. I did this. Now, he had a choice. He had a choice. He could have just taken Nathan and eliminated him. But there would just come another Nathan. He knew this. It's not Nathan's fault. It's God he's dealing with here. So David did the right thing. And the right thing was he repented. And from his heart. Okay, so the real issue is what's going on in his heart. He devised evil in his heart. That's common human practice. We do that all the time. We're always concocting schemes and coming up with things and for personal gain and personal advantage. So David repented. Now, I'm going to read Psalm 51, and we're almost done here. In Psalm 51, this is one of David's psalms, and this is the psalm that he wrote because of this experience. Okay? He wrote this psalm. He says, have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness, and according unto the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgression. So he's saying, oh my gosh, I've got this sin. It's bothering me. It's plaguing me. He says, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgression. My sin is ever before me. I can't get this thing off my mind. And against thee and thee only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight, that you might be justified when you speak and clear when you judge. He said, I was born in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. That means I was just born like everybody else, a sinner. And he said, purge me with hyssop and clean me and wash me, and that I shall be whiter than snow, and make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which you have broken may rejoice. He says, I'm just a broken man here. This thing's eating my lunch. He said, I just can't get over. And I'm just asking for cleansing. I'm asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for mercy from the heart. Great practice. Great practice. So how did it turn out? Well, I'm going to look over in Luke chapter number 1, because 1,000 years later, guess who's coming on the scene? An angel appeared one time during this time of the year, right? We think, or at least we celebrate. And an angel appeared to this little girl named Mary. And Fear not, Mary, he says, verse 30, you have found favor with God. That's cool. And behold, you shall conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. That's cool. So 1,000 years later, we're talking about David still. 1,000 years later, we know that we have the lineage of Jesus, the lineage of Messiah. It looks like David was restored. And because why? He sought restoration from the heart. He said, this is what I want. I need to be reconnected, man. I need to tap back into the grace of God. And when he looked for it, he found it. How to successfully approach God comes from the heart. No amount of religion you can perform will overcome the need for the heart. And so I'm telling you today that our lesson is this, that if you want to successfully approach God, you've got to do it from the heart.